The restaurant was always full on Friday nights. The sound of people talking and glasses clinking mixed with soft background music from the speakers. Emily Carter moved quickly between tables, balancing plates and trays like she had done it her whole life. She wore the same plain black uniform as the other servers, her hair tied neatly back. No one looking at her would guess that she had once dreamed of standing on a concert stage instead of carrying dirty dishes. It had been 2 years since she had left Juilliard. 2 years since her mother got sick and the hospital bills started piling up. Emily didn't regret helping her family, but every time she passed the grand piano sitting in the corner of the restaurant, she felt a small ache inside. The restaurant owner kept it there for decoration now. Nobody ever played it. The keys were polished, but they hadn't been touched in months. That evening, a group of wealthy businessmen came in for dinner. They were the kind of customers the manager always told the staff to treat with special care. They ordered the most expensive wine, the finest steak, and spoke loudly, laughing in a way that made everyone else turn to look. Emily didn't pay them much attention at first. She had too many tables to handle and a long list of orders waiting in the kitchen. When she brought their drinks, one of the men looked up at her. He was tall, well-dressed, and confident in that way people are when they're used to getting what they want. His name was Richard Langston, a businessman who owned several companies and liked to show off his success. He watched Emily carefully, his sharp eyes full of curiosity. "You look like you're not happy being here," he said, swirling his glass of wine. His friends chuckled. Emily smiled politely, trying to stay professional. "I'm just a little tired, sir. It's been a busy night." "Busy nights are good for tips," another man said. They all laughed again. Emily nodded, forcing another smile, and stepped away. She had learned long ago that the best way to deal with certain customers was to keep smiling and move on. Later, when she came back to refill their glasses, she was softly humming to herself without realizing it. It was something she did when she felt stressed, a tune she had written herself years ago. The table went quiet for a moment, and Richard raised an eyebrow. "That's not bad," he said, leaning back in his chair. "You sing too, waitress?" Emily shook her head quickly. "No, sir. Just a habit. Sounds like someone who wants to be on stage, not here taking orders." The tone of his voice made her uncomfortable. She didn't know if he was teasing or insulting her. She just gave a small shrug. "Everyone has dreams, sir." His friends laughed again, but Richard didn't. His eyes shifted toward the piano in the corner of the restaurant. He tapped his finger on the table and smiled slowly. "Tell me something, waitress."
"Can you play that piano over there?"
Emily froze. She looked at the piano, then back at him. "I used to," she said softly. "Used to?" he repeated. "That means you stopped. Why?" "Life happened," she answered simply. Richard leaned forward, intrigued. "So you can really play? Or are you just saying that?" Her stomach tightened. She didn't like where this was going. "It's been a while, sir. How about we test that out?" he said, his tone turning playful but sharp. He pulled out his wallet and placed a crisp $100 bill on the table. "Play something good, and this is yours." His friends grinned. One of them added, "Make it 1,000, Rich. Give the lady a real reason to play." Richard smirked and added more bills to the stack until it reached $1,000. He leaned back in his chair. "All right, waitress, one song. If it impresses me, it's all yours." Emily stared at the money, then at the piano. The entire restaurant seemed to slow down. People at nearby tables began whispering, realizing something unusual was happening. Her hands felt suddenly cold. She didn't want to make a scene, but part of her wanted to prove something. Not to him, but to herself. "Come on," Richard said. "What's the matter? Afraid to embarrass yourself?" His friends laughed again, and that sound made something inside her harden. She took a deep breath and said quietly, "If you really mean it, I'll play." The laughter stopped. Richard raised his eyebrows in surprise. "You're serious?" Emily nodded once. "Yes, sir. You dared me, remember?" He smiled, but it wasn't friendly. It was the smile of someone who thought they were about to be entertained. "All right then. Let's hear it." The restaurant grew silent as Emily walked slowly toward the piano. Her heart pounded in her chest. Every step felt heavier than the last. She could feel dozens of eyes following her. Her coworkers stopped what they were doing. Even the kitchen staff peeked out to see what was going on. When she reached the piano, she paused and looked at her reflection on its glossy surface. It reminded her of all the years she had spent practicing scales, performing at school recitals and dreaming of a career in music. It reminded her of her mother's proud smile before everything had changed. She took a deep breath, sat down on the bench, and lifted the cover from the keys. The piano smelled faintly of polish and dust. She pressed one key lightly just to feel its weight. It was slightly out of tune, but not too bad. Behind her, Richard's voice carried across the room. "Better make it worth $1,000, sweetheart." Emily didn't answer. She placed her hands on the keys and closed her eyes for a moment. In her mind, she could hear her old teacher's voice telling her to play with feeling, not fear. She had lost so much since then, her studies, her confidence, her time. But she hadn't lost her love for music. The restaurant was silent. Even the waiters stood still. Then she began to play. The first notes were soft and uncertain, like a whisper. But as her fingers remembered the rhythm, her confidence returned. The melody flowed smoothly, rising and falling with emotion. Conversations stopped. Forks paused in midair. The soft tune carried through the room like a story told without words. Emily forgot about the money, the crowd, and Richard's smug smile. For those few minutes, there was only the music. Her hands moved gracefully, each note touching something deep inside her that she thought she had buried long ago. She played from her heart, not to prove herself, but because she needed to remember what it felt like to be alive in her own world again. When the last note faded, there was silence, the kind of silence that feels heavy with emotion. Then someone clapped. Another joined in. Soon the whole restaurant was applauding. Some even stood. Emily looked down at her hands, trembling slightly. She hadn't played in so long, but it felt as natural as breathing. She turned slowly toward the table of businessmen. Richard sat frozen, his expression blank. His friends looked just as surprised. For a man who thought he had seen everything money could buy, he didn't know how to react to something that couldn't be bought. Genuine talent. Emily stood, bowed her head politely, and walked back toward the kitchen, her steps calm and steady. The applause still echoed around her. She didn't look at the pile of money on the table. She didn't care anymore. Something far more important had returned to her that night. Her confidence, her passion, and a quiet sense of pride she hadn't felt in years. Richard Langston watched her go, the smirk gone from his face. He had dared her to play, expecting a moment of amusement. Instead, he was left speechless and strangely ashamed. For the first time in a long time, the millionaire didn't feel powerful. He just felt small. After the applause faded and the restaurant slowly returned to its usual rhythm, Emily went back to her section, trying to calm her racing heart. Her hands still trembled a little from the performance. It felt strange, almost unreal to have played in front of so many people after such a long time. The rush of emotion she felt while sitting at the piano still lingered inside her, warm and electric. A few customers smiled at her as she passed by. One woman even touched her arm lightly and whispered, "That was beautiful, dear." Emily smiled shyly, thanking her before hurrying off to the kitchen. She wasn't used to being the center of attention. Most nights, people barely noticed her except to ask for water refills or the check. In the kitchen, the staff were buzzing with excitement. The cooks peeked out from the window that looked into the dining area, talking over each other. "I didn't know you could play like that," one of the chefs said. "You had everyone crying out there," added another. Emily felt her cheeks grow warm. She gave a small laugh and shrugged. "It's been a long time since I touched a piano. I didn't think anyone would even care." Her friend Mia, another waitress, nudged her gently. "Care? Are you kidding?" The whole room stopped eating. Even the boss came out from the office to see what was going on. "You just made the night unforgettable." Emily smiled faintly but didn't say much. Deep down, she was proud of herself, but she didn't want to show it too much. It still felt fragile, like a dream that could vanish if she spoke too loudly about it. When she finally walked back to the dining area, Richard and his friends were still sitting at their table. The pile of money was gone. For a moment, she thought they had left without paying the tip. But then she saw a folded note resting on the piano bench. She approached slowly, her curiosity battling her hesitation. The note read, "You surprised me. You have real talent. Keep it. You deserve more than this restaurant." Inside the folded paper was the $1,000. Emily stared at it for a long moment, then folded it again and tucked it into her apron pocket. She didn't want to think too much about his words. She wasn't sure if they were meant kindly or as another form of pride from a man who could afford to throw money around. Richard watched her quietly from his seat. For the first time that night, he wasn't laughing or showing off. His expression had softened. When their eyes met briefly, he gave a small nod as if acknowledging something unspoken. Emily nodded back politely and turned away. She didn't want to give him the satisfaction of seeing how deeply that moment had affected her. As the night went on, customers kept bringing up her performance. Some asked if she would play again. Others shared stories about learning instruments when they were younger but giving up. Emily listened and smiled, but inside she was lost in thought. She had played to prove something, yet it had stirred something much bigger inside her, a part of herself she had buried under bills and work schedules. When the shift finally ended, the restaurant was quiet again. The last of the customers had left and the staff were cleaning up. Emily stayed behind a little longer, standing by the piano. Her reflection shimmered faintly on its dark surface. She ran her fingers gently across the keys. It was strange how this instrument, sitting untouched for so long, could suddenly bring so much life to the place. The restaurant owner, Mr. Daniels, came out from the back office carrying his coat. He was a kind man in his 50s who rarely raised his voice. He stopped when he saw her by the piano. "You played beautifully tonight," he said quietly. Emily turned, surprised. "Thank you, sir. I didn't mean to cause a scene. It just sort of happened." Mr. Daniels smiled. "If that's what a scene looks like, you can cause one every night." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You know, I bought this piano hoping someone would play it again. Not many people know, but I used to manage live performers before opening this place. I always thought music made people feel more connected. What you did tonight proved that." Emily blinked in surprise. "I didn't know that. I thought it was just decoration." He chuckled softly. "Maybe that's what it became. But after tonight, I think it's time to bring live music back. If you're interested, I'd like you to play here on weekends. Officially, you can still serve if you want, but I'd pay extra for the music." For a moment, Emily couldn't speak. She had to make sure she had heard him right. "You mean like a pianist for the restaurant?" "Exactly," he said. "It would make our guests happy, and maybe it'll make you happy too." Her chest tightened with emotion. She hadn't expected anything from that night, especially not this. I'd love that, sir." "Thank you." He smiled warmly. Then it settled. "You start next weekend. And don't thank me, Emily, thank yourself. You reminded everyone in this place what passion looks like." After he left, Emily sat down again at the piano. She played a few soft notes, just enough to hear the sound echo in the empty room. It felt peaceful. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't just surviving another workday. She was starting to feel alive again. When she finally walked out into the cool night air, she looked up at the city lights. New York always seemed too big, too fast, too full of people chasing something, but tonight it felt a little smaller, a little warmer. She held her coat close and smiled to herself. Across the street, Richard was getting into his black car. His driver opened the door for him, but Richard hesitated. He glanced back at the restaurant one last time. Through the glass, he could still see Emily sitting at the piano, playing softly to herself. Something in that image stayed with him as he drove away. The sound of her music lingered in his mind longer than he expected. The next morning, Emily woke up early, even though she didn't have a shift. She couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. The whole night played over and over in her head. The challenge, the song, the applause, the offer. It felt like a dream she didn't want to wake up from. She made coffee and sat by the small window of her apartment. The sunlight spilled in gently, landing on the old music sheets she had kept hidden in a box under her bed. She hadn't looked at them in years, but now she pulled them out carefully, smoothing the wrinkles. Notes she had once written in pencil filled the pages. The handwriting was younger, full of hope. Her phone buzzed with a message from Mia. "You went viral. Someone posted a video of you playing last night. Everyone's talking about it." Emily blinked in disbelief. She quickly opened her phone and searched. Sure enough, there it was, a short video posted by a customer. It already had thousands of views and hundreds of comments. People were praising her talent, saying they were moved to tears. Some were asking who she was, where she came from, if she had more videos. Her hand shook slightly as she scrolled through the comments. She wasn't used to attention, but she couldn't deny how good it felt to see people appreciating something she loved so deeply. Later that day, she went to visit her mother at the small care home where she was staying. Her mother's health had improved, though she still needed treatment. When Emily told her about the performance, her mother's eyes lit up. "I always knew you'd find your way back to the piano," her mother said, smiling weakly. "You were born to play, sweetheart." Emily squeezed her hand gently. "I think I just needed a little push." Her mother laughed softly. "Even if it came from a rich man trying to make fun of you?" Emily smiled. Maybe especially because of that. That evening, when she returned home, her phone was buzzing again. This time it wasn't just messages from friends. There were emails from people she didn't know. Music teachers, event planners, even a local news reporter wanting to interview her. It was overwhelming, but exciting. She sat by her piano keyboard, the small one she had saved up for years ago, and let her fingers wander over the keys. The sound wasn't as rich as the restaurant's grand piano, but it was hers. As she played softly, she realized something important. The music had never left her. It had just been waiting for her to come back. Far across the city, Richard Langston sat in his office staring out the window. His assistant had just shown him the same video that was spreading online. He watched it quietly, replaying it a few times. Something about that performance stirred feelings he hadn't felt in years. Humility, admiration, and a strange kind of regret. For once, he wasn't thinking about profits or deals. He was thinking about how easily he had judged someone without knowing their story. That night, as he closed his laptop, he made a decision. He wanted to see her again, not to mock her or test her, but to apologize. He didn't know why it mattered so much, but it did. And deep down, he knew that night at the restaurant had changed him just as much as it had changed her. The following weekend arrived faster than Emily expected. All week, she had been nervous and excited at the same time. Mr. Daniels had kept his word. He added her name to the restaurant schedule not just as a server, but also as a pianist for the Friday and Saturday dinner hours. He even had a small sign printed and placed near the entrance. "Live Piano by Emily Carter, Friday and Saturday nights." Every time she walked past it, her stomach fluttered. When Friday finally came, she arrived early. The restaurant was still quiet, the chairs neatly arranged, the floor freshly polished. She wore the same uniform as always, but tonight she had added a simple silver pin her mother had given her years ago. It wasn't expensive, but it made her feel confident. She sat at the piano before the first guests arrived, warming up her fingers on the keys. The sound echoed softly through the empty room. The calm before the dinner rush felt peaceful. She took a deep breath and smiled to herself. It felt good to be here, not as a server taking orders, but as someone doing what she truly loved. As the evening began, familiar faces started to fill the tables. Some of the regular customers smiled when they saw her at the piano. A few even waved. Word had spread from the previous week's performance, and people had come hoping to hear her again. When she started playing, the chatter in the restaurant softened as if everyone instinctively lowered their voices to listen. The music filled the space with warmth. The sound of the piano blended with the clinking of glasses and the soft laughter of diners, creating a mood that felt almost magical. Emily played everything from gentle classical pieces to soft jazz and a few of her own compositions. Each song carried a piece of her heart. She didn't perform for applause. She played because the music flowed naturally, like it had been waiting to come alive again. People listened closely, and when she finished a song, they clapped with genuine appreciation. Between sets, she still helped the other servers. She didn't want special treatment. She moved gracefully between tables, smiling when guests complimented her playing. The staff teased her lightly, calling her the star of the restaurant. She laughed, feeling lighter than she had in years. Halfway through the evening, she noticed a familiar face near the back of the room. Richard Langston had walked in quietly and taken a seat alone. He wasn't surrounded by friends or business partners this time. He wore a dark suit, but his expression was different, more thoughtful, less proud. Emily's heart skipped a beat when she saw him. Part of her wanted to ignore him, but another part felt curious. What was he doing here again? He didn't seem like the kind of man who returned to the same restaurant for the food. When she finished her set, she excused herself for a short break. As she passed his table, Richard looked up and gave her a polite nod. She hesitated, then stopped. "Good evening, sir," she said quietly. "Emily," he replied with a small smile. "I hope you don't mind me stopping by. I wanted to hear you play again." She studied his face for a moment, trying to read his tone. It didn't sound mocking or arrogant like before. "I don't mind," she said simply. "I'm glad you enjoyed it," he nodded. "Last week. I owe you an apology. I was rude. I thought I was being clever, but I was just being foolish. You didn't deserve that." Emily blinked, caught off guard by the sincerity in his voice. "Thank you," she said softly. "That means a lot." He looked around the restaurant as if searching for the right words. "You reminded me that talent can come from anywhere. I thought I understood people, but I guess I've been too busy looking at numbers and not enough at hearts." Emily smiled faintly. "Sometimes we all forget what really matters." He nodded, his eyes thoughtful. "You have something rare. When you play, people feel it. You made this whole place stop last week, not because they were shocked, but because they were moved. That's not something money can buy." She didn't know what to say. No one had ever spoken to her like that before. "I just play what I feel," she said. "That's all I've ever done," he smiled. "And that's exactly why it works." Before she could respond, one of the servers called her name. It was time for her next set. She excused herself politely and returned to the piano. As she played again, she noticed Richard watching quietly from his table, listening with the same focus as everyone else. But there was something different in his eyes now. Respect. By the end of the night, when the restaurant began to empty, Richard approached her again. The staff were cleaning up and the lights had dimmed to their soft evening glow. "You were wonderful tonight," he said. "I wasn't exaggerating earlier. You have real gift." "Thank you," she said, smiling. "I appreciate that." He hesitated for a moment, then added, "I'd like to help you if you'll let me. I have some connections in the music industry, producers, venue managers. If you're interested, I could introduce you." Emily looked at him, unsure what to think. It was a generous offer, but it felt too sudden. "That's kind of you," she said carefully. "But I'm happy where I am right now. I'm not ready for anything big." Richard nodded, understanding. "That's fair. Just know the offer stands." "I mean it. Thank you," she said again, and this time her smile was genuine. "Really?" he smiled back. "You're different, Emily. Most people I meet want something from me. You don't. That's refreshing," she laughed lightly. "Well, maybe I just don't know what to ask for yet." He chuckled softly. "Maybe." As he turned to leave, he paused. "I'll see you again, I hope?" "Probably," she said with a small grin. "This is my new stage now." He nodded and walked out into the night, leaving her standing by the piano with a strange feeling, half curiosity, half warmth. Something told her that this wasn't the last time she would see him. Over the next few weeks, her weekend performances became the restaurant's main attraction. More and more people came to listen, some recording short clips and sharing them online. Her name began to spread beyond the restaurant. Local bloggers wrote small pieces about her, calling her the waitress who played her way back into her dream. The attention was flattering, but Emily stayed grounded. She still worked her weekday shifts, still visited her mother, still kept her life simple. But she felt a sense of purpose again. Every time she sat down at the piano, she felt closer to the person she had always wanted to be. Meanwhile, Richard continued to visit quietly, usually sitting at the same table near the back. He never brought anyone with him and never made a scene. Sometimes he would stay through 2 or 3 sets, listening without saying much. Emily began to notice that he looked different each time, less tense, more human. The walls of pride he wore like armor seemed to be slowly coming down. One night after her final performance, Richard approached her again. "You know," he said softly, "you're the reason I've started listening to music again. I used to love it when I was younger, but somewhere along the way I forgot how much it mattered." Emily smiled gently. "Music has a way of finding people again. Sometimes when they need it most." He nodded thoughtfully. "You're right about that." He paused, then added, "I've been thinking about something. Would you consider playing at one of my events? It's a charity gala for children's education. I think your story and your music would touch people there." Emily hesitated. The idea of playing in front of a big crowd made her nervous, but she also knew it could be a good opportunity. Not just for her, but for something meaningful. "I'll think about it," she said honestly. "That's all I ask," he said with a smile. As he left that night, Emily sat at the piano a little longer, lost in thought. She had never imagined that one dare, meant to embarrass her, would lead to so much change, not just in her own life, but in someone else's. The thought made her smile. Outside, The city lights shimmered through the windows. The restaurant had emptied out, leaving only the soft hum of the night beyond the glass. Emily pressed one final key, letting the note ring out softly before fading into silence. Somewhere deep inside, she knew her journey had only just begun. The next few weeks were some of the busiest and happiest of Emily's life. The restaurant had turned into a place where people didn't just come to eat. They came to listen. The soft light, the clinking glasses, and her piano music created a feeling that made people stay longer, talk softer, and smile more. Even the staff seemed lighter. Music had changed everything. But one evening, as she finished her second set, Mr. Daniels approached her with a wide grin. "Emily, I just got a call from Richard Langston's assistant," he said. "He wants to formally invite you to play at his charity event next month. It's going to be big. Television crews, reporters, guests from all over the city." Emily froze for a moment. That's incredible," she said, trying to sound calm. "But are you sure he wants me?" Mr. Daniels laughed. "I think he's very sure. He said you'd be the highlight of the night." The thought made her heart race. She had never played for more than a few dozen people, and now she was being asked to perform in front of hundreds, maybe even thousands, at a high-end event. The idea thrilled and scared her at the same time. That night after her shift, she sat at the piano long after closing time. The restaurant was dark except for a few dim lights near the bar. She let her fingers drift across the keys, playing softly. Her reflection shimmered faintly on the piano's glossy surface. "A charity gala," she whispered to herself. "Can I really do that?" She thought about her mother, who always believed in her. She thought about the people who came to the restaurant to listen, who closed their eyes when she played. Maybe this was her moment to give something back, to remind people that dreams didn't fade, they just waited. Over the next few weeks, she practiced every day. Before her shifts, after her shifts, even during breaks. Mr. Daniels would sometimes walk by smiling quietly, watching her hands glide across the keys. "You're going to be amazing," he told her more than once. Emily wasn't so sure, but she was determined to try. The day of the event finally arrived. The charity gala was held in a grand ballroom at one of the city's most luxurious hotels. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, and golden lights shimmered on the walls. Guests in elegant clothes filled the room, mingling and chatting as soft music played in the background. Emily stood backstage, her hands clasped together tightly. She wore a simple but elegant black dress that Mr. Daniels had insisted on buying for her. "You're representing the restaurant tonight," he had said, smiling proudly. She had never felt so nervous in her life. Richard met her before the show started. He looked different tonight. Not the confident businessman who once dared her to play, but someone more relaxed, almost humble. "I'm really glad you agreed to do this," he said. "I almost didn't," she admitted with a nervous laugh. He smiled gently. "You'll do great. Just play like you always do. Play from the heart. That's what people remember." She nodded, taking a deep breath. "Thank you for inviting me." He hesitated, then said quietly, "No, Emily. Thank you for saying yes. You don't know how much this means. To me and to the cause." When it was finally time for her performance, the lights dimmed and the host introduced her. "Ladies and gentlemen," the voice said, "please welcome a remarkable young woman whose story has touched many hearts, Miss Emily Carter." Applause filled the room as she walked onto the stage. She tried to smile, but her hands felt cold. The grand piano gleamed under the lights. She sat down, closed her eyes for a moment, and took a slow, steady breath. The first notes came softly. The melody was one she had written herself, something new but full of emotion. It was tender and strong at the same time, a reflection of everything she had been through. The crowd grew quiet. Even the servers stopped moving. The music seemed to reach everyone in the room, filling the air with warmth and longing. As she played, she thought about the past, the long nights at the restaurant, the heavy trays, the sleepless worries about money, and the one moment when she had been dared to play. That night had changed everything. Without that challenge, she wouldn't be here now. She felt tears sting her eyes but kept playing, her fingers steady. When the final note faded into silence, there was a pause, a breathless moment when no one moved. Then suddenly the room erupted in applause. People stood, clapping and cheering. Some even whistled. Emily looked up, stunned. For a second, she didn't know what to do. Then she smiled, a real wide smile, and stood to bow. Richard was the first to stand, He clapped harder than anyone else, his eyes glistening slightly. When she walked off stage, he met her by the steps, still applauding. "That was extraordinary," he said softly. "You didn't just play music, you told a story. Everyone felt it." Emily laughed, a little embarrassed. "I just played what I felt. And that," he said, "is what makes it powerful." The rest of the evening passed in a blur. People came up to her, introducing themselves, praising her performance, and asking where she played regularly. A few offered business cards, music teachers, event organizers, even a small record producer who said he wanted to talk about recording her work. By the end of the night, she was overwhelmed but happy. Richard found her again near the exit as the event was winding down. "You did something special tonight," he said. "Not just for yourself, but for everyone here." Emily smiled. "I'm just glad it went well," he nodded. "It did more than go well. You raised more donations than we've ever had at one of these events. People felt something tonight. That's what real art does, it moves people." She was quiet for a moment, then said softly, "You know, when you dared me to play that night, I was angry at you. I thought you were mocking me. But maybe it was meant to happen that way." Richard sighed, his voice gentle. "It wasn't fair of me. I wanted to show off, and I ended up showing myself what I didn't know. You taught me something that night, Emily. You reminded me that talent and dignity don't depend on money." "I'll never forget that," she smiled. "Maybe we both learned something." He extended his hand. "Friends?" She shook it. Friends. After that night, things began to change even more. The video of her performance at the gala spread quickly online. People shared it across social media, calling her the waitress who played her way to the stage. She received more invitations to perform, small concerts, community events, even an interview on local television. But Emily stayed true to herself. She still played at the restaurant every weekend, still greeted customers with a smile, still visited her mother on her days off. Fame didn't change her. It simply gave her new ways to share her music. One evening, a few weeks later, she sat at the piano after closing time again. The restaurant was empty except for Mr. Daniels, who was counting receipts at the counter. She played quietly, lost in thought. Richard came in quietly, surprising her. "Still here?" he asked. She smiled. "Just finishing the night. It helps me think." He sat at a nearby table. "I wanted to tell you something. After the gala, I started a new project, a music scholarship fund for kids who can't afford lessons. I named it after my grandmother. She used to play piano too." Emily's eyes widened. "That's wonderful," he nodded. "It's because of you, you know. You made me remember what music meant to people. You made me realize that success isn't about how much you have, but what you give." Her chest filled with warmth. "That means a lot, Richard. I'm really proud of you," he smiled. "No, Emily, I'm proud of you." The two of them sat in the quiet restaurant for a while, the sound of soft piano notes filling the space between them. It wasn't the same as that first night. They weren't strangers anymore. They were two people whose lives had unexpectedly crossed, changing each other in ways neither could have predicted. When Emily finally stood to leave, Richard said, "You know you have a gift, Emily, not just for music, but for making people believe again." She smiled gently. "Maybe that's what music is supposed to do." He nodded. "Yes, and you do it better than anyone I've ever seen." That night, as Emily walked home under the city lights, she thought about how far she had come. From being a tired waitress with a hidden dream, to standing on a stage where her music touched hearts. It all began with one careless dare, but it had turned into something beautiful. And as she reached her small apartment, she whispered softly to herself, "Dreams never really die, they just wait for the right song to bring them back." Months passed, and Emily's life slowly found a new rhythm. She was no longer just a waitress who played piano. She had become someone people recognized and admired. The restaurant where she worked was always full, with customers coming in just to hear her play. Mr. Daniels had even added a small stage with soft lighting and a sign that said, "Live Piano by Emily every weekend." It made her smile every time she saw it, but even with the attention and success, Emily never let herself forget where she came from. She still helped serve tables when the staff was short-handed, still talked to customers like old friends, and still stayed late to help clean up. Music hadn't made her proud. It had made her grateful. One morning, she received a letter that made her heart race. It was from a music foundation in the city, an organization that supported local artists. They wanted her to perform at a community concert featuring musicians who had inspiring life stories. Emily could hardly believe it. The event was scheduled in a large public park, open to everyone, and it would be broadcast live on local television. She read the letter over and over, hardly believing her name was on it. That night, she showed it to her mother, who was sitting in her wheelchair by the window, a soft blanket over her lap. Her mother's eyes lit up. "You see, sweetheart? I told you your music would take you somewhere." Emily smiled, holding her mother's hand. "It's taking both of us somewhere." The next few weeks were filled with preparation. The concert would feature several performers, but Emily's story was one of the main highlights. A small team came to the restaurant to film a short feature about her, how she went from waiting tables to touching hearts through music. They filmed her at the piano, serving customers and even walking with her mother in the park. When she saw the finished video, she almost cried. It wasn't fancy, but it was real. It showed her life, her struggles, and her passion. The day of the concert arrived. The park was buzzing with excitement. Families sat on blankets. Children ran around with balloons and volunteers handed out flyers. A large stage had been set up with colorful lights and banners. Emily stood backstage looking out at the crowd. Her stomach felt like it was full of butterflies. She took a deep breath and reminded herself that this wasn't about being perfect. It was about sharing something real. She closed her eyes and whispered to herself, "Just play with your heart." When it was her turn, the host introduced her warmly. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said into the microphone, "our next performer is someone whose story reminds us that dreams can survive even the hardest times. Please welcome Emily Carter." The audience clapped and cheered as she walked onto the stage. She wore a light blue dress that fluttered gently in the breeze. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the crowd. She sat at the piano, looked out at all the faces waiting for her to play, and smiled. The first song she played was one of her own compositions, something soft and emotional. The music flowed like a story full of hope and warmth. The crowd grew quiet. Some people closed their eyes, swaying gently. Others held hands. Even from the stage, Emily could see the emotion in their faces. As she played the final note, a hush fell over the park. Then came the applause, loud and heartfelt. Emily felt her throat tighten. She stood up and bowed, tears in her eyes. The host came back on stage, shaking her hand. "That was beautiful, Emily," he said. "Your music has a way of reaching people." She smiled. "Thank you. I just play what I feel." After the show, reporters approached her with questions. "How did you feel playing in front of so many people?" One asked. Emily laughed softly. "Terrified," she admitted. "But once I started, it felt like home." Another reporter asked, "What message do you want to share through your music?" She thought for a moment before answering, that no dream is too small. Even when life gets hard, you can still find a way to keep going. Sometimes all it takes is one small chance, one person believing in you. Her words touched people, and the short clip of that interview spread quickly online. Within days, she was being invited to perform at more community events, charity functions, and small theaters. Everywhere she went, people recognized her as the waitress who turned a dare into a dream. Richard, meanwhile, had been busy too. His scholarship fund for young musicians had officially launched, and several students had already received grants to study music. He sent Emily an invitation to the first scholarship ceremony, asking if she would perform there as well. When she arrived at the event, she was surprised to see how big it was. The hall was filled with students, parents, and teachers. Richard greeted her warmly. "You helped make this possible," he said. "I hope you know that," Emily smiled. "I just played the piano," he shook his head. "No, you reminded people what music can do. That's far more important." During the event, Emily played again, but this time she shared the stage with 3 of the scholarship students. They were young, one of them barely 12, but their passion was undeniable. Watching them play made Emily feel proud, not of herself, but of how far things had come. The music connected them all. After the ceremony, a little girl approached Emily shyly, holding a small notebook. "Can you sign this?" she asked. Emily smiled warmly. "Of course. What's your name?" The girl hesitated, then said softly, "Lily, I want to play piano like you someday." Emily knelt down and looked her in the eye. "You can, Lily, just promise me one thing, never stop playing even when it's hard." The girl nodded eagerly. "I promise." That small moment touched Emily deeply. She had once been a girl like Lily, full of dreams but unsure how to reach them. And now she was in a place to inspire others, to show them that even ordinary people could do extraordinary things. Over the next few months, Emily's life continued to grow in beautiful ways. She recorded a few of her songs in a small studio, with the help of some friends she had met at the gala. Her music was played on local radio stations, and people sent messages from different cities telling her how her story inspired them. Despite all the attention, Emily remained grounded. She still visited the restaurant often, not to work, but to play for old friends. The regular customers always welcomed her with cheers and hugs. Mr. Daniels would shake his head and say, "I knew you'd make it big one day," but Emily always replied with the same words, "I didn't make it big, I just kept going." One quiet evening, Richard stopped by the restaurant. It had been months since they last saw each other. He ordered a cup of coffee and listened to her play, just like that first night. When she finished, he clapped softly. "That song," he said, "it sounds familiar." Emily smiled.
It's new.
"I wrote it last week. It's about new beginnings," he nodded slowly. "It's beautiful. You know, every time I hear you play, I feel like I understand life a little better." She laughed gently. "I think music does that to people." They talked for a while about life, the scholarship program, and how far things had come since that unforgettable night. There was no pride or distance between them anymore, just mutual respect and friendship. As Richard was leaving, he said, "You know, that dare was the best mistake I ever made." Emily chuckled. "It wasn't a mistake, it was a beginning." When he left, she sat at the piano again, playing softly. The restaurant was almost empty, just a few couples finishing their meals. Her fingers moved gently over the keys, creating a melody that was calm and full of light. She thought about everything: the challenges, the fear, the hope, the kindness of strangers, and the way one small moment had changed her entire life. Music had opened doors she never even knew existed. It had given her a purpose, a voice, and a way to connect with others. As the last note faded, she looked around the restaurant and whispered, "Thank you." It wasn't clear who she was thanking, the world, fate, or maybe that long-ago dare. But in her heart, she knew one thing: every step, every song, and every smile had led her here, and she wouldn't change a thing. Time moved forward quietly, like the gentle rhythm of one of Emily's songs. Seasons changed. New faces came and went at the restaurant, and her name slowly became known beyond the city. Yet even as opportunities opened before her, she stayed grounded in the same place where it all began, the little restaurant with the piano by the window. One morning, as sunlight spilled through her kitchen window, Emily sat with a cup of coffee reading through her messages. There were invitations to perform, requests for interviews, and even offers from music schools wanting her to teach part-time. But one message stood out from the rest. It was from a community center in a small town outside the city. They were hosting a benefit concert to raise funds for a new music program for underprivileged children. They wanted her to perform and speak about her journey. She smiled as she read it. It wasn't a big event like the gala or a grand concert hall, but something about it felt special. She could imagine the faces of the children who might hear music for the first time, just like she once did. Without a second thought, she replied, "I'd love to." The weeks that followed were filled with planning. She chose a few simple songs, pieces that told stories of hope and change. She also decided to bring her mother along for the trip. Though her mother was weaker now, she still smiled at every mention of Emily's music. "You go and make them believe in dreams," her mother said softly, holding her hand. The day of the concert came, and Emily arrived at the small town with her mother and a few friends from the restaurant. The community center was modest, with folding chairs, colorful banners made by local children, and a small stage decorated with paper stars. The atmosphere was warm and welcoming. People from the neighborhood greeted her with genuine smiles, not because she was famous, but because they were happy she came. When the lights dimmed and her name was announced, Emily walked to the piano and looked out at the crowd. The front rows were filled with children, some fidgeting, others wide-eyed. Parents sat behind them and volunteers stood along the walls. It wasn't a glamorous setting, but to her it was perfect. She began to play softly, letting the notes rise and fall like a conversation. The song was one of her favorites, something simple but full of feeling. As she played, she could see the children's faces light up. Some closed their eyes, some leaned forward as if trying to catch every sound. The room was quiet except for the melody. When she finished, the applause that followed wasn't loud or polished, but it was pure. It came from hearts that truly appreciated her gift. Emily stood, smiling through tears. "Thank you," she said. "Music changed my life when I had nothing else to hold on to. I hope it does the same for you." After the concert, people came to speak with her. Parents thanked her, children asked questions, and teachers spoke about how her story inspired them to keep their own programs alive. Emily felt overwhelmed with gratitude. Every handshake, every kind word, reminded her why she loved what she did. That night, back at the small guest house where she and her mother were staying, she sat by the window looking at the stars. Her mother rested nearby, watching her with gentle eyes. "You've come a long way," her mother said. Emily smiled. "I couldn't have done it without you." Her mother chuckled softly. "You've done more than I ever dreamed of. I'm proud of you, sweetheart. You turned kindness and talent into something beautiful." Emily looked down at her hands, the same hands that once trembled when she first touched the piano keys in front of Richard. "It's funny," she said. "Everything started because someone dared me to play. I didn't even want to that night. I was angry, embarrassed, but maybe that moment was meant to happen." Her mother nodded. Sometimes life hides blessings in strange disguises. The next morning, they drove back to the city. On the way, Emily thought about how much her life had changed, not in money or fame, but in meaning. Every time she played, she wasn't just performing. She was sharing a piece of her journey with others. And that, she realized, was worth more than anything. When she returned to the restaurant the next weekend, the staff welcomed her with hugs. Mr. Daniels had arranged a small surprise. As she walked in, she saw a framed photograph hanging near the piano. It was a picture of her from the gala night, her hands hovering above the keys, eyes closed in concentration. Underneath, a small brass plate read, "Emily Carter, where it all began." She stared at it for a long moment, feeling tears well up in her eyes. "You didn't have to do this," she said quietly. Mr. Daniels smiled. "We wanted to. Everyone who walks through those doors should know your story. You remind people that greatness can come from the simplest places." That night, Emily played again at the restaurant. The familiar hum of conversation filled the air, and candles flickered on every table. As her fingers touched the keys, she felt a deep peace settle over her. She no longer played for approval or recognition. She played because music was part of her soul. Halfway through her set, she noticed someone familiar sitting in the corner. Richard. He was alone, a small smile on his face as he listened. After she finished the song, he clapped softly and walked up to her. "Still making magic," he said warmly. She smiled. "Still finding new songs to play." He paused, looking around the room. "You've changed this place, you know. There's something special about it now. It's not just a restaurant, it's a place people come to feel something." Emily looked at the piano, then back at him. "I think we both changed it." He nodded slowly. "Maybe we both needed that night more than we knew." They talked for a while, catching up on life and the scholarship program. Richard told her how the fund had helped dozens of young musicians, and how some of them were already performing on big stages. "It's funny," he said. "I started that project because I wanted to make up for my mistake. But now it's become something bigger. It's changing lives," Emily smiled. "That's the power of second chances." As the evening ended, Richard stood to leave. "Keep playing, Emily," he said softly. "The world needs people like you." She nodded. "And it needs people like you too." When he left, she turned back to the piano. The room was quieter now, with only a few customers left. She began to play one last song, a new melody she had written recently. It was calm and full of warmth, like a memory turned into music. As she played, she thought about everything. The struggles, the laughter, the lessons, the people who had come into her life because of one daring moment. The notes seemed to carry her gratitude, floating through the air like whispers of the past. When the final note faded, she sat there for a moment, listening to the silence. Then she smiled softly and whispered, "Thank you." The next day, a journalist from a local newspaper came to interview her about her story. Near the end of their talk, the reporter asked, "If you could go back to that night when you were dared to play, would you do it again?" Emily laughed softly. 1,000 times, yes. That night taught me that courage doesn't mean you're not scared, it means you do it anyway. Sometimes the smallest act of bravery can change your whole life. The reporter smiled. That's a beautiful message, Emily nodded. It's true. You never know who's watching or how your story might inspire someone else. So never hide your gifts. Use them, share them. You might just change someone's world without even realizing it. That night, after everyone had gone home, Emily sat at the piano again. The lights were dim, the restaurant quiet. She played softly, her music blending with the distant sounds of the city. It wasn't for an audience or a performance, it was just her and the piano like old friends. As the song drifted through the empty room, she felt an overwhelming sense of peace. Her journey had started with doubt and fear, but it had led her to something far greater, a life filled with meaning, kindness, and hope. And as the last note lingered in the air, Emily smiled. Somewhere deep inside, she knew that her story wasn't over. It was still being written, one song at a time.